All right. So, Matthew, the 22nd chapter is where we started on Sunday. And just to kind of recap, well, once again, if you want a replay of Sunday, here's me not remembering how to turn this thing on. We talked about the three parables that Jesus ended chapter 21 with. He ended with two of them, but then the third one is kind of recorded at the first part of Matthew 22. And then, uh, and those were the parable of the two sons, the parable of the landowner, parable of the marriage feast. And in all of these, he is imparting some understanding to these Pharisees, Sadducees, and these Jewish leaders about the fact that the kingdom of God is being taken away from the Jewish people, that the promise is going to be given to a new group of people, a group of people who will genuinely fear God and keep his commandments. Um, and even after that, all that, they still came together to try and trick him, to entrap him, to get him to say something that if they couldn't trap him in the law, in the spiritual law, they were going to try and trap him in man's law. And that's what they tried to do with the tribute to Caesar and talking about, is it okay? Is it permissible to pay the Roman government, or is it not? And he settled that once and for all, and righteously so by saying, give unto Caesar what is Caesar's, but give unto God what is God's. Um, and then he talks to the Sadducees, and we talked about how they tried to trap him in as well. And so every part of the Jewish culture, the Jewish religious body and leadership is trying to take Jesus and trap him in some element that they can then use against him. And I think that's very, what I will tell you, going back as we review this and reiterate some of these points, is that it is a sad society that they live in right then. We think we live in a sad society, but here we at least have the freedom to worship as we please and be free of the police and the government barging in these doors and telling us what to teach, what to preach, and so on. But here and today we're able to bring as many people together, teach them whatever we believe is the truth, and so on. Back then, they're trying to keep people out of heaven. They're trying to limit heaven and limit eternal life to a select few. And Jesus calls them on the carpet for it. Jesus answers the question about what is the greatest command. And he says, you shall love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, and with all your mind. And then he follows up, the second is like it. You shall love your neighbor as yourself. And on these two hinge the whole law and the prophets. And we talked how they really do like to focus on the law, the written stuff, but they don't like to focus on the people stuff. And that's the thing right there. I've told Mike before, and I think everybody in this building would agree with this. Mike, one of your best traits is your ability to work with other people. And your likability and your willingness and ability to talk to anybody. I've never seen a grown man have great friendships with kids all the way to, older people. I didn't use any names. I had plenty of options. And I'm in a rare mood, so I can roast almost anybody tonight. But that's what he's talking about, is the ability to love your neighbor, whether child or older adult, anywhere in between, build relationships with them and bring them to the truth. And they didn't get that. They wanted to hold it to themselves. And so he posed a question back to them at the end of 22, and he said, "How does David say, 'The Lord said to my Lord, sit at my right hand'? And then how is he also going to say uh, in verse 45, 'If David then calls him Lord, how is he his son?'" And it was a question to make them think. I think it was partly a question to make them stop for the day. Uh, but this is the experience that Jesus has in this day and in this time as we get into chapter 23. So in chapter 23, we get here, and he speaks to the crowds in verse 1. And so we know that there's people around. We started in on this on Sunday morning. And there's crowds around, and he talks to them, and he says, and he starts laying out accusations against the Pharisees, against the Jewish leaders. And in my brain, and I go back to and you have to understand my brain as a history and government teacher. I go back to the U.S. Declaration of Independence, and if you want to boil that document down, it is a lawyer, what's called a lawyer's brief against King George III. Well, this because Thomas Jefferson laid out legal arguments for why King George III was wrong and violated the trust and should be, so on. Well, here Jesus laid out what, in my brain, looks like a lawyer's brief against the law abiders and the law professors of the day, the Pharisees. And so we looked at it this way, that he accused them, righteously so. He says in verse 2, the scribes and the Pharisees have seated themselves in the chair of Moses. He's saying they have put themselves in place of Moses and the law. They have put their customs and traditions and their think-sos in place of actually what the law says and means. They say things and do not do them. What do we call those people? Hypocrites. They tie up heavy burdens and lay them on men's shoulders. What do we call those type of people? I call them jerks. If you're gonna put a burden on somebody's shoulders and not go and help them carry it, and you're just going to sit back and watch, that's laziness. That is evil to me. My best friend taught me this. There's a difference between leadership, which these guys are supposed to be leaders. Can we all agree on that? They're supposed to be leaders. But I was taught there is a difference between leadership and losership. Leadership says, here's the way, follow me. And I will push you from behind if I have to keep you going and motivate you and help you. Losership says, here's the load, carry it yourself. I'll be over there. They themselves are unwilling to move them with so much as a finger. No help whatsoever. But they do all their deeds to be noticed by men. For they broaden their phylacteries and lengthen the tassels of their garments. And we pointed out that box right there is a little box that they strap to their forehead and has prayers written inside of it. And they'll put tassels on, and they'll wrap prayers and things around their arms. All to be seen. They love the place of honor at banquets and the chief seats in the synagogues. Once again, they love to be seen. They love to be heard. They want to be the person that everybody looks up to. And verse 7, they want the respectful greetings in the marketplace, and they want to be called rabbi. I'm of the belief that, there are times where you refer to somebody because of their position, and I am a big believer that at all possible, you refer to somebody out of respect. They just wanted to be called rabbi, not because they had earned it, and just because of their position. I'm a rabbi. Call me rabbi. Look at me. I'm a teacher. I'm a leader. Look at my spot. Look at you down there. They wanted to be seen and they wanted to be heard. They didn't want to actually lead. And leadership is everything. Sorry. That's my basketball coach. So then he simultaneously implores the crowd to use godly caution and wisdom as well. Because he then tells the crowds, all that they tell you to do, if it's in the scriptures, which is what he's talking to, do it and observe it, but do not do according to their deeds. But do not be called rabbi. And this is where Jesus is really drives this idea home. Is he really against the idea of a rabbi? No. He's against the idea of somebody going after the title, after the position. He says, for one is your teacher, and you are all brothers. What he's trying to do here is he's trying to unify the people in a mindset of you are the children of God, and there is one who is the lawgiver. Do not call anyone on earth your father, for one is your Father, he who is in heaven. Do we have a religious denomination that likes to refer to their religious leaders as fathers? Yeah. Do not be called leaders, for one is your leader. That is Christ. He's not against leadership. He's not against spiritual leaders. That's what his disciples were called to do, is to be leaders of the first century church. But he's saying there is one leader, one God, one leader, and that is Christ. Not all these people and their generational think so that comes with it. And then verse 11, but the greatest among you shall be your servant. Whoever exalts himself shall be humbled, and whoever humbles himself shall be exalted. So he's bringing back some of these earliest teachings, from when he taught about in the Sermon on the Mount, and talking about humility, talking about the value of putting others first. And that's what the Jewish leadership had lost sight of. And so then he goes in and he proclaims 8 woes. Now, in Matthew, and we mentioned this on Sunday as well. In Matthew, there's 8. But if you look at Mark and Luke, there are 7. And so it depends on which gospel account you're looking at. We're looking at Matthew, and we'll get to number 2, which is the one that they think might have been copied from Mark and Luke here in just a second. But he says to them, Jesus does, in verse 13, this is the first of 8 woes. Woe to you, scribes and Pharisees, hypocrites, because you shut off the kingdom of heaven from people. That, my friends, that is an egregious sin. You shut off the kingdom of heaven from people? Imagine being the elders here, and we're having Sunday service, and what do? They lock the doors and don't let all the visitors in. That is shutting the doors on the people. Not letting people understand the truth, not correctly in reading the truth and preaching the truth, that is shutting the doors to the kingdom of heaven from people. For you do not enter in yourselves, nor do you allow those who are entering to go in. They're not only content not to go in themselves because they want to hold on to power, they're content with keeping people out and keeping people under their thumb. And that Greek word translated shut off, which is kleo, means shut or lock or bar. And it's related to the word for key, which is in Greek is kleis, which is also used when Jesus talks about the keys of the kingdom of heaven. Well, they're shutting the doors. Who's he giving the keys to? Who's he giving the keys to the kingdom to? The disciples, Peter. And so they are busy. He's accusing them of poisoning the minds of those who would listen. We get into woe number 2. And this is the one that scholars believe is potentially copied from Mark the 12th chapter and Luke or Luke the 20th chapter. And here Jesus says, "Woe to you, scribes and Pharisees, hypocrites." Maybe this is an ongoing thing. He identifies them by name, and then he calls them and identifies them by a new title, hypocrite. Because you devour widows' houses, and for a pretense you make long prayers, therefore you will receive greater condemnation. What's he saying there? You're acting holy without being holy. And what are you doing in the process? Taking away from those who are in need and those who have very little. And, if this occurred, then the Pharisees are guilty of theft by using their position in the church among the Jewish people. Number 3, woe to you, scribes and Pharisees, hypocrites. Okay. Dad, I need you to take this. I'm going to have to take this. Sorry, guys.
was it Mark Twain that said that the Americans are a proud people, and when we overcome it, we're proud of the fact that we did? You're right. These people would not recognize that in themselves. Let's see what Jonathan's got next. Woe to you, blind guides, who say, whoever swears by the temple, that is nothing, but whoever swears by the gold of the temple is obligated. You fools and blind men, which is more important, the gold or the temple that is sanctified the gold? And whoever swears by the altar, that is nothing, but whoever swears by the offering on it, he is obligated. You blind men, which is more important, the offering or the altar that sanctifies the offering? Therefore, whoever swears by the altar swears both by the altar and by everything on it. And whoever swears by the temple swears both by the temple and by him who dwells within it. And whoever swears by heaven swears both by the throne of God and who sits upon it. Now, how much religious worth is in a building? Be my guest. I haven't read your notes previously.
You're a better teacher than I am.
But no, not by a long shot.
I had a conversation with Kelly Holt not long ago, and we both agreed that and Phyllis and I were just talking about this before class, that at some point our jobs get in the way of having to do things like this. And unfortunately, we've got a small thing that we're now having to deal with. So hopefully we'll get it taken care of tonight. We'll start addressing it after services as well, but I've got somebody working on it now. So I appreciate Dad stepping in. So did you cover all the number 4? Can I just go to 5? Or do I need to reteach it for you? Okay. So number 4, woe to you blind guides who say, whoever swears by the temple, that is nothing. But whoever swears by the gold of the temple is obligated. And here Jesus starts using an example of an oath. He points out their hypocrisy by using this example of an oath. And they're all about the word choice. They're all about leading others into this blindness and using these word games to entrap people into being like themselves. Whoever swears by the temple, Jesus says, that is nothing. But whoever swears by the gold of the temple, okay, so there's some difference between the gold of the temple and the temple itself. You fools and you blind men, which is more important? And he points that out, the gold or the temple. And whoever swears by the altar, that is nothing, but whoever swears by the offering on the altar. So there's a difference between one versus the other. And once again, he comes back at them and says, you blind men, which is more important? The altar or the altar that sanctifies the offering? And therefore, whoever swears by the altar swears both by the... And here's where he brings this all together on both of these two examples. Whoever swears by one is swearing by the whole thing. So you're not going to swear by the altar or the offering. You're going to swear by the whole thing. You're not going to swear by the temple or the gold on the temple. You're going to swear by the whole thing. You're not going to mince words and parse words out and use a little bit of this and a little bit of that. You're going to do the whole thing. And that's why he says in verse 21, whoever swears by the temple swears by both the temple and by him who dwells within it. And whoever swears by heaven swears by both the throne of God and by him who sits upon it. And so once again, they're using these word games to try and point out and bind people into a situation that was never meant to be bound on people. They're trying to entrap people into little bitty details that nobody ever said to bind on people. So I'm glad you said that, because here's what when I'm looking at this and reading this, what does in my brain from a non from a not a Christian perspective, but from a otherworldly religious perspective, what does a temple and gold and an altar all have in common in other religions? They tend to be where idols are worshipped, or they are the idol that's worshipped. And so they're hitting on the physical stuff, aren't they? They're not hitting on the spiritual. They're not trying to get people to go to heaven. They're trying to bind them into little bitty details. And they're trying to one up God. And I don't care who you are, how much money you got, how smart you are, or both, how smart and how much money you have. You're not going to one up God, Kenny. That's a really, really good question. And I have a mentor who told me to admit it when I don't know. Yeah, they were a major group of that day. The Sadducees were a smaller group, but they were your upper echelon of that society. But in terms of numbers and everything compared to the larger population, I don't know that answer. But that's a really good question. Uh, but what I will share with you is that their influence, regardless of how many people there were, their influence was great. Because, you know, people were told from generations before that these people were in charge. So you listen to these people. That's what the people knew. And people obeyed. People complied. But, you know, when people withhold information, when the group in charge withholds information from the larger population, you get an uneducated, illiterate, and often naive society that are willing to just comply and go along. Yes, sir. So I wasn't too far off, um, but excellent question. Um, Looking at woe number 5. Woe to you, scribes and Pharisees. Man, there's that word again. Hypocrites. You all are going to go to bed tonight, and you're going to wake up mad at me tomorrow because you're going to go to bed tonight and have dreams of this word hypocrite floating around in your brains all night long. It's going to stew in your brains. I'm willing that to be in your brains right now. You just mark my words. And I expect angry text messages to be sent to Larry Vaughn. But woe to you, scribes and Pharisees, hypocrites! For you tithe mint and dill and cumin, and have neglected the weightier provisions of the law, such as justice and mercy and faithfulness. But these are the things you should have done without neglecting the others. You blind guides. He brings that phrase back up. He's not just calling them hypocrites, he's calling them blind guides who strain out a gnat and swallow a camel. He's accusing them of basically being so concerned with the seeds. How big is a mustard seed? We talked about this not long ago. How big is a mustard seed? I don't have a pen on me. But there we go. Can y'all see the bare tip of that pen? And that's the point. You took my dad joke. Come on, dude. Mustard seed. They were more about the little bitty, counting every little mustard seed, every little piece, than they were about. And you know, if someone's counting, being very, very diligent about counting every little bitty seed, we're going, man, they are faith. Man, they are so good. Look at them. They're being so faithful. They're trying so hard. But what are they neglecting in the process? He says, you're neglecting the weightier provisions of the law. But skip over those three words. These are the things you should have done without neglecting the others. So he's saying you should have been very conscientious of your tithing, no doubt. But that should not have replaced the justice and the mercy and the faithfulness. Going back to how we treat other people. You have to do both. Weigh out your seeds, be faithful in your tithing, but but at the same time, exact same time, be merciful, show faithful, be committed to justice. And they operated on it's an either or proposition. No, it's both. It has to be both. We can't come in here and do contribution on first day of every week and then say, hey, because I gave contribution, I can treat my brother or sister like dirt. We're neglecting this. No, we would be just as guilty. And so they worked so hard to avoid the minor missteps, but they fell off the cliff entirely. And that's what he says here. You strain out a gnat. You're sifting through the little things, but you swallowed the big thing. You ate the camel in order to strain out that little bitty thing right there. Yep. You know, we talked earlier in this class. Where does murder begin? In your heart. Where does adultery begin? Where does any and all sin begin? Your heart. Where does prioritizing, a seed over kindness and gentleness and mercy and justice, that's when you're neglecting one for the other, you're still sinning because you're neglecting all these other responsibilities that we have as people of God. We can't say, well, this is serving the greater good. No, we have to do both. We have to do both. Woe number 6. Woe to you, scribes and Pharisees, hypocrites! Keep it in your minds. Hypocrites. You're going to think about it all night long. For you clean the outside of the cup and of the dish, but inside they are full of robbery and self-indulgence. That is a unique analogy, isn't it? And some of the women in here are shaking their heads and want to point their fingers at their husbands, because how many of us are guilty of, late at night or whatever, we're supposed to wash the dishes and we're like, oh, come on, and we'll skim through it real quick. He's saying you clean the outside of the cup and of the dish, but you're leaving the inside filthy. You're leaving the inside untouched. So you're willing to clean the outside and not touch the inner man. You're willing to put on a good show for everybody, but you're not willing to touch the inner man. You're not willing to make yourself the person you actually should be. You just want to appear to be godly and holy. You blind Pharisee. First, clean the inside of the cup and of the dish. So there's some practical advice here for us. So that the outside of it may become clean also. And, once again, it is a unique analogy because I don't know of any other time where Jesus talks about a dish like this and uses this sort of analogy. But when you're standing at that sink, and I challenge you to really kind of think about doing this. The next time you're at home and you're washing a cup or a plate in the sink, start with the outside and then go to the inside and see how that backwards that feels. And then get another cup, and even it could be a clean cup. Just try it. Start with the inside and then work your way to the outside. That feels more correct because you're making sure that the inside is the way it should be. That's where the substance of what you're going to hold is going to be. So you want to make sure that is clean first and foremost, and then you take care of the outside. Outside will come along. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah. It's at the heart of the matter. It's the inside that Christ is saying you got to fix. And there's this running theme throughout all this. It's about the heart of the man, the heart of the person. And then you get to the outside. And if you're only focused on the outside, then you're only focused on influencing and showing other people how great you are. You're not caring about showing God who you really are. But he sees it anyway. Woe number 7. Woe to you, scribes and Pharisees, hypocrites! Hypocrites! I've heard that if you say it 16 times, it sticks in your brain. Janet. No. NyQuil does wonders. Janet back there, by the way, is smiling at me. Mike's back there kind of stone-faced like, I wish he'd stop. For you are like whitewashed tombs, which on the outside appear beautiful, but inside they are full of dead men's bones and all uncleanness. He goes from washing a cup to talking about tombs. But it's the exact same analogy. So you too outwardly appear righteous to men, but inwardly you are full of hypocrisy and lawlessness. Inwardly you are full of hypocrisy and lawlessness. They're so focused on making it appear good, they forget to be good. And and I wrote this on here the other day. Imagine a man who has the whole world at his fingertips. Whole world at his fingertips. And he looks great. He has all he needs. He feels great. But without the inside being righteous, this man is simply a shell with a dead man inside. Think about that. Has everything at his fingertips, but without being righteous, he is a shell. Woe number 8. Woe to you, scribes and Pharisees, hypocrites, for you build the tombs of the prophets and adorn the monuments of the righteous, and say, if we had been living in the days of our fathers, we would not have been partners with them in shedding the blood of the prophets. So you testify against yourselves that you are sons of those who murdered the prophets. Fill up, then, the measure of the guilt of your fathers. You serpents, you brood of vipers, how will you escape the sentence of hell? And here he's telling them, look, you talk about how if you lived back then, you would have lived differently. You would have acted differently towards the prophets of old. But he says, no, you're actually convicting yourselves here. Because you're not only the physical descendants of these people, you're also the spiritual descendants of these people. And you've done the exact same thing. And then we get to the end of this, we're close to the end of this, where he starts telling them he is sending prophets and wise men and scribes, and he starts foretelling what is going to be coming out in the future. Some of them you will kill and crucify, and some of them you will scourge in your synagogues and persecute from city to city, so that upon you may fall the guilt of all the righteous blood shed on earth, from the blood of the righteous Abel to the blood of Zechariah, the blood of Berechiah, from whom you murdered between the temple and the altar. Truly I say to you, all these things will come upon this generation. He is passing sentence right there almost on them. And then he laments over Jerusalem. It's like he's crying over this city that he loves so dearly, that means so much to the Jewish nation. This city that was part of the promised land, the city where the temple has been built twice before, and it's being reconstructed for the third time in the history of Israel. He says, Jerusalem, Jerusalem, who kills the prophets and stones those who are sent to her. How often I wanted you to gather your children together. He's talking like a parent wanting to gather to his own. The way a hen gathers her chicks under her wings, but you were unwilling. And he says, your house is being left desolate. You will not see me. And this will be the last time he's here. We pick up at chapter 24 on Sunday.